Hey guys, Brendan Productions here, and welcome to yet another Visual Basic .NET tutorial. In this tutorial I will be using Visual Basic .NET 2.0 using Visual Studio 2010 on a Windows 7 machine. In this tutorial I will be discussing how to actually make a label that is clickable and editable. We will be using most of the previous lessons that we've actually learned about. So if you don't know the basics of programming, be sure to check those out. So, the basic idea of our application is we want to create something with a label and another label. However, this is going to be some sort of data application, so we want the user to be able to click on the label and actually change what's in the label during runtime. So this is definitely going to be something that is common amongst most Office applications that manage things that need to be changed, such as names, usernames, passwords, etc. So let's go ahead and dive right into creating this object. So in order to create something that we want, we're actually going to want to create our own custom object. So I've named my tutorial Text Box Change Control Tut, because we are going to actually make our own control. So in order to first add our own control, I'm going to right-click on our project in the Solution Explorer and click Add, and then press User Control. Now I get to select from all of the available user controls in Visual Studio 2010. The one that we want to actually make is a user control. So I'm just going to name this changeable label. So the changeable label, of course, starts out as just a basic regular control with a boring gray background, but we can definitely change this as time goes on. So there are several aspects of this control that we actually want to touch upon. Let's go ahead and go back to our regular form. And as you can see, we have two labels here. So the idea is that label 1 will be something like an identifier, and label 2 will actually be information. So what we actually want the user to be able to do is double-click on the information identifier or the information label and change it. Now, the only problem with this is when we create a changeable label, we want the identifier to be anything of any length. So we could actually have this be zip code / street address, something kind of long. And then what our first problem here is that if our identifier is long, our second label actually covers up our first label. So we're going to have to actually programmatically move the label over. However, to prevent this, we're going to actually put everything in what's called a flow layout panel. So we're just going to go to our toolbox here and add a flow layout panel to our project. So this flow layout panel actually helps organize controls within a form. So we're just going to click on this little arrow here and press Dock and Parent Container. The flow layout panel is now our main control. I'm just going to rename the flow layout panel to FLP_main and go ahead and get started on our properties that we need to edit. Now the first thing we need to do is make sure that our flow direction is left to right, because we want these two labels to be placed left to right. We also want to make sure that wrap contents is set to true, because if there's an overflow, we do want the contents to actually wrap to the other side. So everything is set correctly by default. Now we're actually going to change the background of this flow layout panel to transparent, which is in the web category, and then we can go ahead and start making our control. So in the flow layout panel, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and add a label. So this label is, I'm just going to call it LBL, short for label, _ identifier. So the identifier is going to be something like our name. We're going to make it kind of long once again. So street address. And then right after our identifier label, we are going to have our information label. So I'm going to name this LBL _ information. And then this is going to actually contain the information that our user has typed in. So I'm going to live on 12345 Muffin Lane. Isn't it Drury Lane? Yeah, it is. But that's okay. This is a perfectly valid address. So what I'm actually going to do is, what we want to do is when the user actually double-clicks on this label, we want a text box to appear that actually takes in input, and once the input is typed and the Enter key is pressed, we want the user or the text boxes or the label's information to actually change. So let's go ahead and make this into a much better suited control. We're going to go ahead and go to our changeable label object and change the background to transparent. We're also going to adjust the size a little bit because we don't want this to be misproportioned. And now we can go ahead and jump right into the coding of this actual application. So the first thing we need to manage is actually what happens when the user double clicks on the second label. So we can go ahead and click on the label, go to the Actions or Events tab in the Properties window, scroll down to Mouse double click, and then double click in the empty box. This will create a new subroutine or method that will actually activate when the mouse is double clicked on the label. So let's go ahead and start coding. So the first thing we want to do is we actually want to take the label, save its text, delete the label, put a text box where the label was, and then put a new label where the text box, or a new label where the old label used to be. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save the label in its old state. So I'm going to say dim old label as label equal to, and we are going to, of course, save it as the information label. So we are just making a copy, a small duplicate of our information before we actually change it. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove the old label from the flow layout panel. So we're going to say flp_main.controls.item, or actually .remove at, and then the item that we want to remove is the second item that we actually inserted into the flow layout panel. And that is because when we actually dragged it in, we put the identifier label first and then the information label second. So since it is the second object and computer science counting starts at 0, we're going to remove at an index of 1. So now we have our old label saved and our old label actually deleted. This is perfect. The next thing we want to do is we want to actually generate a new text box that will fit inside the flow layout panel and actually allow the user to type in information. So I'm going to say dim txt_information as new text box. So this text box actually needs to be just around the same size as the old label and placed right inside the flow layout panel, right where the old label was. So let's go ahead and resize it now. Dim text box size as new system.drawing.no as new size. And here we actually are going to specify the dimensions. So the height is going to be the default height of the text box. However, the width is what really matters. The width is going to be the actual width of the label itself. Now, one of the things that is actually interesting about labels is when you actually type in information, the width property of the label itself does not actually change. So to get the actual width of the label, we're going to go ahead and access the graphics object of Visual Basic.net in order to get the width of the label using its current font. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're going to create a private function getLabelWidth, and then we of course are going to send in a label as an object or as a parameter. So inside of this actual subroutine, we're going to want to access the graphics object and return the width as an integer. So we are just going to say as integer to keep things organized. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to actually want to do is we're actually going to want to create the graphics method that is actually attached to the label. So we're going to say, or the graphics variable rather. So we're going to say dim_g as graphics equal to label.createGraphics. The next thing we're going to want to do is actually create a new variable that will store the font size. So I'm going to say dim font size as size f, which is a size that stores in float variables. Now we're just going to simply say font size equals g.measureString. So this simply measures the width of a certain string written in a certain font. So the text that we're actually going to want to measure is the label's text, and the font is the label's font. Pretty simple. And then we are going to just return font size.width. So this method will actually get the label's width and allow us to resize the text box to that width. So as the width, we are going to want to get label width of the old label, and the height is just by default going to be the default text box size or text box height. So I'm going to say txt underscore information dot size dot height. So the next thing we actually want to do is go ahead and assign this size to the text box. So now we can say txt underscore information dot size equals text box size. Great. So we now have an application that generates a text box and deletes a label, which is good. The next thing we actually want to do is we're going to want to plop the text box right where the label used to be. So now we're just going to say flp underscore main dot controls dot add, and then we're just going to pop in the new text box, txt information. Now the final thing we actually want to do with our application is we want to make it so when the user presses enter on the text box, it actually changes the label's text, or at least appears as so. So we are going to want to create a new method that activates when the user presses enter on the text box. So we can do this by, first we're going to minimize our getLabelWith subroutine here, and we're going to create another private subroutine. So we're going to say private sub txt underscore information underscore click, or enter, or rather key press. And then we're just going to want to send in a byval, wait. Oh yes, it is a sender as object and e as key event args. Key press event args, that is what we want. So now that we have our own private sub, which has a sender as a parameter and basic arguments as a parameter, which are the two basic supported parameters within VB.NET, we can go ahead and simply link our text box to this method. So we can say add handler txt underscore information dot key press, and we're going to send it to the address of txt information key press, and this is of course our private sub. So when the txt underscore information underscore key press method is called, the first thing we need to do is make sure that it is the enter key that is being pressed. So we're going to say if Microsoft.visualbasic.chrw dot no. We want to start with by saying if e.keychar equals Microsoft.visualbasic.chrw, and then we are going to want to plop in the key code, which is keys dot and enter. Then, so what this line of code is basically saying is if the key pressed is the key from the key code from enter, we're just basically checking to see if the key is pressed enter. So, and this would be the line to do that. So if the user actually presses enter, then we actually want to do a few things. First of all, we want to remove the text box. Second of all, we want to create a new label and plop it right back in there. And third of all, we want to I'm sorry. That's actually pretty much it. So let's go ahead and get started. Now I did notice a couple flaws within our first little method. We will set the old label as label equal to LBL information. And then we go ahead and remove LBL information from our FLP main. So this is definitely a problem because LBL information is removed, and this will not work for a second time. So instead of actually getting directly the label LBL information, let's go ahead and just get the second control within FLP main. So we're going to first cast to a type, and the object is going to be FLmain or FLP underscore main dot controls dot item, and this is going to be at index 1 because we inserted it second, and the object type is going to be a label. So that's that. And the second thing we want to do is we actually want to set the text of the information text box equal to old label.text. So now that we're good to go, let's go ahead and edit this. So the first thing that we need to do is we actually need to create a new label. So I'm going to say dim new label as new label. Now there are a few things that we need to edit within this label. The first thing that I'm actually going to edit is the text property. So I'm going to say new label.text equals txt So what we're actually going to want to do is we need to create a variable that references the txt underscore information text box. So we can say dim txt underscore information as text box equal to ctype sender and text box. Because in any basic application, the sender parameter is actually what triggered the event. So the txt underscore information should have triggered the event. So now we're just going to set the text of this new label equal to txt underscore information.text. And then all we need to do is remove the text box from our flow layout panel and then plop the label right back in. And we should be good. So let's go ahead and check this out. flp underscore main dot controls dot remove at, and remember, since we removed the label and then plopped in a text box, the text box is now at index 1. So once we remove the text box, we can actually go ahead and just go ahead and add the new label in. So flp underscore main dot controls dot add, and we're going to add in new label. So now we've actually got a whole control set up where you can actually double click on a label, a text box will appear, you can change the text, press enter, and everything should be good. So let's go ahead and actually test out this control. Well, actually, yeah. No, actually, I'm just going to do one thing before we do that. I'm going to create two properties for this control so we can actually insert default values. So I'm going to say public property identifier text as string, and in the get section of the property, I'm just going to return the lbl identifier.text, and the set value, I'm just going to set lbl underscore identifier.text equal to value. And in the public property, I'm also going to create a new property known as, what did we call the other? Oh, this is not indentifier, it is identifier. And what did we call the other label? Whoops, we called the other label the information. Right, I knew that. So we are going to public property information text as string, and in the get section of the code, we are going to return lbl underscore information.text. And in the set value of the string, we are just going to set value equal to, or rather, lbl underscore information dot text equal to value. So now we've got properties, so we can actually set up our object as we like. So now if we jump back to our form here and actually delete our old labels, we can go ahead and test out our new labels. So the first thing we need to do is we actually need to save our project. I'm just going to save it to my default Visual Studio directory, and then we need to press build and rebuild our project. Now if we actually go into our toolbox and scroll to the top, our changeable label object should be there, which it is. So now we've got this giant changeable label object which has two labels in it. So we can go ahead and change the actual label text right in our properties window since we created these properties. So I'm going to make the identifier text property equal to name, and as you notice, the object automatically resizes, and the information text is going to be Brandon. So now we can go ahead and run and test out our application. So say you're running this application and your name is not Brandon. You double click on Brandon, a text box appears that is the same length as the window label was. You type in a name, so say my name is actually Alexander, and then you press enter. Once you do that, the text box disappears and the label appears as Alexander. Voila. Now there are a few problems with this control that we can fix right now. As you can see, when we double click on this label, when we double click on this label a second time, it does not activate because the method that actually works with double clicking is bound to the first label. So we need to actually relink the object. Another problem was the text box that appeared was just a little bit too small. So we are actually going to increase the text box width by 25 pixels from the label width. So once we create this new label, we're actually going to want it to link right to the same method that lbl underscore information was linked to with its double click. So we're just going to go ahead when we create our new label and say add handler new label dot mouse double click, and we're going to send it to address of lbl underscore information mouse double click. So now that should be set. Now one more thing that was actually a little clunky was when we changed the actual text of either label, the control width actually was a little too big. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make a method that resizes the control's width depending on both of the labels within the control. So I'm just going to make a private subroutine called private sub resize control, and this is going to be a very basic subroutine. The first thing we need to do is we need to get our two labels. So I'm going to get dim lbl underscore identifier. No, because that's already exists. Dim ident label as label equal to, and this is going to be flb main.controls.item 0, and we're going to want to convert this to a label. So C type it, and this is a label. Then we also want to dim info label as label equal to C type flp underscore main.controls.item 1, and this is also a label. And let's just say that we want the padding space as equal to 10. So this is actually the space in between the labels, and we'll just say it has a default of 10. I'm sure there's actually a setting in the flow layout panel that actually defines the space between objects. Actually, there's not, or so it would seem. So we're just going to jump right back into our code and do it this way. So the next thing we need to do is actually resize our control based on the addition of the width of all of these values. So we're going to say dim width as integer equal to, and then we're going to use our get label width method, ident label, plus get label width for info label, plus our padding space. And now we can simply say me.size equals new size and send in a width and a height. So the width is going to be the new width variable that we just defined, and the height is going to be me.size.height, because we are not actually going to change the height of this control. So now we can go ahead and go back to our form and rebuild our control, and we can test out this auto-changing, well actually, no. The auto-changing method that we just created will not actually be activated at any point. So what we need to do is sync the methods of the two labels we have to this method. So resize control is going to be handled when the new label text is changed and when the identifier label text is changed. So we are going to say add handler here, new label dot text changed, and address of resize control. Whoops, you're not supposed to enter parentheses there. And we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it in the designer with the identifier label. We're just going to go ahead and find the text changed property and set it to the method resize control. We're just going to have to manually type that in. Well, no, we're not actually. We can just do this in the code. In the code, we can say private sub resize control handles lbl identifier dot text changed, and then a comma, and then lbl information dot text changed. So now when both properties texts are changed, the form will actually resize itself. So we can press build, rebuild, and change the text and watch the control actually resize itself. So we're going to change the information text to Alexander once again, and as you can see, the control actually resizes itself a little bit too small. So we need to go ahead and adjust our padding value. We're just going to change it to a nice big padding, like 25. Jump back to our form, rebuild the project, and then we're going to once again change it. The information text is going to be Ryan this time, and as you can see, it resizes the control to an appropriate size. So let's go ahead and edit this application in runtime. So I'm just going to make the identifier text once again street address and leave the information text as Ryan. So we can go ahead and jump right into the debugging, double click on Ryan. As you can see, when we create a new text box, it actually jumps outside of the padding. So we're going to actually have to make the padding a little wider in order to adjust for the text box addition. So we're going to change our street address to 11111 Cancer Street. Press enter, and as you can see, we have a problem with the whole sizing of the control. The sizing of the control is just too small. So let's go ahead and jump back into our changeable label here, and let's dump the padding to 50, just because we can. Now, one thing that is probably happening is when we actually create the new label, and add it to the control, the text is never actually being changed on the new label. It's just being created with a certain text. So we could just dump down to our where we press enter, and we can actually call the resize control sub right from there. So let's go ahead and start debugging once again, which will of course fix it. And now, okay, our padding is still 50, which is not so nice. Oh wait, we need to actually change the text once again. So the information text is now going to be Ryan. We just changed, well, we didn't actually. Ryan with 2 N's. So now we've got the extra padding space added on there. And let's go ahead and actually debug our application. Double click on Ryan. We get the appropriate text box. Now we're going to type in the street address, 1234 Stargate Avenue. So now if we press enter, it all fits on one line, except once again we have that problem with the control not being wide enough. So the control resizing, as you can see, can present a number of errors. One of the other problems that it can present is if you actually stick this control within a flow layout panel, every time you change the text on this control, it will actually shift everything else over. So the control resizing idea isn't the best idea. However, in our circumstance, it definitely works well, as long as we can kink out these last-minute bugs. So when we actually press the enter key, it is having a problem actually translating the control width to a new width. So let's go ahead and check this out. So what we do is we add a new label that detects the new double-click properly. I'm sure I didn't actually test it. No, yes, did I? I don't know. Let's go ahead and test that. So if we double-click on Ryan, change it to Ryan with 2 N's, and then double-click on Ryan again, we can actually change it once again. So as you can see, the width is not properly being adjusted. So let's go ahead and check this out. When we press enter, it is changing the text changed sub to go to resize control. It's removing the text box, adding the new label, and then we resize the control, where ident label is the first label and info label is the second label, and padding space is 50. So the width is the label width of the ident label, the info label, and the padding space, and the new size is that width. As you can see, we are definitely having a bit of trouble with this method. I mean, the only thing I can really think of is setting the padding space to 100, change the street address to Ryan with 2 N's, Ryan with 3 N's, Ryan with 4 N's, Ryan with 5 N's, 6 N's. Oh, well, this is actually working pretty well. Let's try a full-blown street address, 11111 Gazer Avenue. See, if we do this, though, it cuts it off once again, because the control doesn't actually resize itself. So what's one thing we can do to actually detect this this problem is we can jump into our actual form here, or our control, and we can actually make it have a border. So we can say border style equal to fixed single. So now if we actually run the application, there's a border around our control. So if we change it to Ryan with 2 N's, you can see that our control actually changes its size by a very decent amount. So if we actually try typing in 11111 Stargazer Avenue, you can see that the form itself is actually well equipped to handle the size of what we just typed in. However, the label actually seems to be restricted by what we are typing in. So this must be a problem with the actual behavior of the label and not the flow layout panel itself. So let's go ahead and check out this behavior of the second label that we created. So we create a new label, and we set its text to txt_information.text, and there definitely seems to be a problem with the width. After we press enter, let's make sure that no, of course that would work. So what we are actually going to do is we are just going to set the new label's width to a pretty large amount. I'm pretty sure that that's the problem. The new label's width is not set properly to what we are actually typing in. So what we are going to do is we are going to go ahead and set new label's width. So we're going to say dim width as integer equal to get label width, and then we're going to send in new label. No, wait. Yes, and then we're just going to say new label dot size equals new size, send in the width, and new label dot height. So let's go ahead and check out to see if this works. So we're just going to double click here and type in 11111 Stargazer Avenue once again, and as you can see, the label is gone. So that obviously did not work. Such is the life of programming, gentlemen. Let me pause the video and come back with a solution. Alright, so I have figured out that what we were trying to do with the label's width is actually accessible right within a label's property. So this is called the auto size property, which actually adjusts the width automatically when new text is added. So all we have to do is say new label.autosize equal true, and now if we start debugging and double click on our information that we want to change here and set it to 1111111, let's think of something pretty long. Big Dipper Galaxy, oh my gosh, Lane Street Avenue, and press enter, you can see that the control actually resizes itself, and the label is actually fit pretty well. Now, one of the problems, of course, is the padding space is now just a little bit too big, so we'll change that back to 50, go into our label, remove the border, border style, none, press debug, wait, I did say none, didn't I? Press build, rebuild, debug, what's happening? Go back to our form, delete this changeable label, put a new one in, run it, double click on 12345 Muffin Lane, type in Brandon, enter, and there we have it. We now have a label that we can actually change ourselves. So, this can definitely be used in all types of Office applications where the user has to actually type in data. And this is useful because now you can actually go ahead and save or create some sort of save function inside the changeable label where it actually saves this information to the user's hard drive. So thanks for watching this tutorial. Sorry about the little glitchiness at the end there, but that's okay because that's how you learn. So thanks a lot for watching this tutorial. Hopefully you learned a little bit, and please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.